Yes?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So we've got the topic is Mac Miller, drug dealer, gets 11 years in prison. So this case it's from 2018. And what happened was Mac Miller, who's a very well-known hip-hop artist, and he passed away from an overdose of fentanyl-laced, Oxycontin or oxycodone and a mixture of cocaine, fentanyl-laced oxycodone, and alcohol, which is a very potent and very deadly combination, especially if you do not know that there is fentanyl in the product you're using. And me and Mary have had this discussion before off air just about because of whether it's talking about my sobriety, my issues with past drug use, discussing the legalities of drugs and how these things work in the world today. And in this case, it was interesting to me that the 11 years felt light to me as far as a sentence. I didn't know what to compare it to, so I found another case of a more recent, like something around the same timeline of somebody else who got a sentence for somebody dying of an OD relating to fentanyl-laced pills.
Was this 11 years for manslaughter then?
So let's just go start right into the article. And it says, a man charged with supplying fentanyl-laced pills before Mac Miller's fatal 2018 overdose was sentenced to almost 11 years in prison on Monday. I don't know what almost is, if that means like 10 and a half.
10 years and 11 months, it says.
Okay. So at a hearing in a Los Angeles federal court, U.S. District Judge Otis D. Wright sentenced Ryan Michael Rivas to 10 years and 11 months in prison. The verdict comes 6 months after he reached an agreement with prosecutors to plead guilty to a single count of distribution of fentanyl. So it's not even necessarily for his death. Likely they can't prove that it would be harder to prove that he caused that death. I don't know.
Was he doing it knowingly?
There are several men involved in this case. So I actually, if I'm remembering correctly, this man, Ryan Michael Reeves, is there was like a guy who procured the contaminated drugs, and it's unclear if he knew or didn't know if they were laced with fentanyl, who then sold them to someone who sold them to Mac Miller. And all three of those, like all the steps in that link, were brought on charges. It's actually, I think, irrelevant I think he can speak to motivation if he knew or didn't know if there was fentanyl in the drugs, but you are still legally responsible for the death, even if there's fentanyl.
Yep.
I think largely he is pled out on he's not being convicted of a murder charge or a manslaughter charge because he reached a plea deal. It's probably in his agreement with the government, and I suspect in turn he has given up information to prosecutors on like who
supply
else
chains
is going on. Yeah.
It says this is from the other article from TMZ. It says, more importantly, he claimed he had no idea that the pills he was supplying were counterfeit. Despite this, the judge seemed to have dished out an even-handed sentence, but not before hearing a statement from Mac Miller's mother, Karen Myers. It read, he would never knowingly take a pill with fentanyl, ever. He wanted to live, and he was excited about the future. The hole in my heart has always been there, will always be there. In other words, she insisted the alleged drug supply dealers and suppliers, in this case, were solely responsible for his parish. As we reported, Reeves was first arrested back in 2019 in Arizona when authorities say they found a bogus doctor's notepad from which he presumably filled prescriptions. They also claim they found firearms and drugs. That's even more surprising that he's not getting weapons charges.
It's all in the plea deal.
It would have to be all pled, like all into one
like that's
charge.
what's frustrating about plea deals from the outside is that like is usually a function for them. In some ways, like this is getting him into jail faster than if they went to trial. Like he would not
cost the state less money.
Right, cost the state less money. A number of different things like that our legal system has for a reason, but it is interesting that like from the outside we don't get to be a part of the conversation that says like why this guy in particular got this deal. Right? So, why isn't he being punished on anything else? Even like again, one single charge seems kind of crazy, which might explain why the judge was like, well, I'm going to give you as much as I can on this sentence. So
just to keep track, Rivas, the alleged supplier, is the first of three men charged who's received his sentence. Walter, the alleged runner, hasn't officially learned his fate yet. Neither is Pettit, the alleged dealer. So those cases are both still pending. We'll probably cover those when they come up through. But I found this article. It says Sylmar man pleads guilty to selling fentanyl that killed Camp Pendleton Marine from the U.S. Department of Justice. A Sylmar man was sentenced to at least 2 decades in federal prison after he pleaded guilty Would pled guilty work too there?
Yes,
I'm
it
literally
would.
okay. Yeah. After he pleaded guilty on Friday to selling counterfeit oxycodone pills to a U.S. Marine at Camp Pendleton, who later died of an overdose. Gustavo Jaciel Solis, 25, pleaded guilty to charges of participating in a drug trafficking conspiracy and distributing fentanyl, resulting in death. So those seem to be much more pointed charges than that of what happened with Mac Miller. And what I thought was interesting about this is there's the very clear thing that I saw was 20-year minimum. There was very much minimum sentences involved in this. Can minimum sentences be avoided if involved with a plea, or is minimum sentence only applicable? Obviously, none of us here are lawyers. Or is minimum sentence only applicable if you go to trial and lose?
No, a minimum sentence is standard as far as I know in my coverage of crime. That a judge considers the minimum sentence when handing down the deal, right? Like an attorney general can say, okay, you committed this crime, but for whatever reason, we've decided that the best course of action is to offer you a plea deal, and then you accept. They can say, we'll ask the judge for this in the terms, but the judge then makes the decision, right? It's not into the two parties alone who are bartering this plea deal. The thing about the comparison case here is, number one, it sounds like Solis was specifically the person who exchanged the cash for the pills with the Marine.
Yep.
So he's 1 degree closer to the death, whereas the man convicted in connection with Mac Miller's death appears to have been removed, from my understanding of it.
It says that the 20-year sentence is the mandatory for the fentanyl charge and potential life sentences for each drug charge. So it's imagine having to...
But like the other guy, this is a distribution resulting in death, meaning he literally handed off the pills, whereas that's not what's going on with the other guy. Again, it's sad, but and also conspiracy charges I feel tend to carry a little bit of weight, and it speaks to the fact that it's part of a larger web that they're probably trying to take care of. It sounds more like the other guy was more narrowly involved in the case. That's my theory, at least.
So 11 years. Just from your opinions, do you believe that this was a fair sentencing?
I believe it was. This it's not okay for young people to be dying of overdoses like this. It reminded me of Lil Peep and how this kept happening over and over and over again, especially in this era. Lil Peep happened the year before, and then Mac Miller, and I think Juice WRLD at the same time. And
it's hard because it's so baked into the culture. Drug use is so baked into the culture here.
I was surprised that his mother seemed so confident that he wasn't suicidal or didn't at least have some kind of suicidal ideation, because I am reminded of one of his last singles, Self-Care, where in the music video he was literally just in a coffin getting buried.
But that's symbolic. It doesn't
I
necessarily
understand.
indicate...
Yeah, his art doesn't necessarily speak to exactly what he's thinking and his mental health, but still, he was doing a reckless behavior that led to his death. Not that he's at fault.
No.
He didn't know, but...
For me, when I was going through the worst of my phases, it wasn't necessarily that I was suicidal, but I was so... Now, obviously, this is speaking to my experience, not to his. I was so immersed in this world and felt so hopelessly trapped within it, within that world of drug use, that it wasn't so much that I was suicidal. It was just... But I had accepted that was probably how I was going to die. I had no desire to die, but had no way out of where I was, and just kind of accepted that the path I was on,
intent.
That it would end up that way. And I think that's a very common train of thought for a lot of people in that world, where they don't want to die, but they're so beaten down by what the drugs have done to them. And I'm not speaking for him. I don't know his case, but I'm saying that it's very easy to fall into that pattern where you continue the self-destructive behavior because it's too painful not to.
What I would say is that his interest in committing suicide actually, to me, doesn't have any weight on what his mom said. His mom said that he would not have taken a drug knowingly taken a drug
Yeah.
laced with fentanyl. People who take fentanyl aren't necessarily suicidal. Fentanyl, from what I understand, is cheaper than a lot of
Yep.
other opioids that are out
Well, that's
there.
why they cut it with.
That's why they cut it with it, and that's why if you were to just buy it, like if you are,
Yep.
hooked on drugs and you don't have other options, it becomes more desirable, and also
Mm-hmm.
it benefits the dealer because you're more dependent. So her saying that he wouldn't have knowingly taken fentanyl, to me, speaks to the fact that like he's a successful artist, right? He didn't
Yep.
need to look for the bargain drug that came with the risk.
But you're always taking that risk when you now that was what was scary about it for me. My in the throes of my struggles, the best logic I could give you is that if you, at the very least, if you're taking it prescription drugs, you know that you're getting a curated dose every time, and you're going to get relatively the same potency every time you take it because it's federally regulated. Whereas when you're like, I never made the jump to needles or to heroin because I was too terrified of hot shot or of an overdose, and that because you don't know what it's cut with. But now with the ease of with the continual access to fentanyl and the way it's being used to mass produce counterfeit drugs, you're taking just as big of a risk doing that now as you would if you were just buying heroin. And all of that is kind of terrifying for people in this place, because the addicts, like, you're not. Like, you don't have the ability to be discerning. You don't. You're a prisoner to what you're going through, and you have to just take what you can get. And every time you do it, you're essentially, it's essentially Russian roulette.
Yeah. To go back to your question of if this is a fair sentence, I'd want to look more carefully on. I think he's being sentenced in Arizona, right?
Yes.
I'd want to see more carefully what their minimum sentencing requirements are. Generally, I feel like it's a good sentence. It's one of those things that, like, without knowledge of what's going on with the plea deal, it's very hard for me to comment on.
And we probably won't ever know that.
We'll probably never know. I am curious to see what happens with the other two men involved in the case.
Yep. We will follow that closer. So I just think this is one of those things where, like, we see a lot of we're going to cover like some of Johnny Depp later in Podluck, but there's a lot of the behavior that they're talking about in there all seems to be heavily connected to like binging and drug use, and it's just such a we talked about it on IRL last night. It got brought up by somebody else, and I realized halfway through that I'd brought it up like on any of the episodes that it had come up on the episode, all three of the episodes that I'd done, and I'd never been the one to bring it up. It was just brought up, so it's like it kind of makes you realize how widespread these types of problems actually are when three separate people come on the show. And it didn't come up. I mean, Dallas didn't have anything to do with that, but it came up in the realm of the conversation we were having regarding someone else. So it's such a common thing for people to be going through that you could have a conversation with anyone at any given time, and they'll have their story, whether because of themselves, or a family member. They're experiencing some of the fallout from it.
And what I would say personally is it's important for anyone who can to pay attention to the lawsuits going on with big pharmaceutical companies that were involved in the spread of opioids in, especially, I mean, to me, it's like the Appalachian region of America, because that really did open the door for anyone to traffic fentanyl into the U.S. and have an incredible impact on, everyday civilians. So it's worth keeping an eye on that, and when you can, advocating for justice in that.
And if you want to see, if we're still talking pop culture and movies, there's a show that I don't have the stomach to watch because of like it's all those things are very much a trigger for me. There's a show called Dope Sick that covers it quite well. Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.
Bye.